So hello and welcome to another fantastic webinar from my GWork. My name is Chloe Davies. I'm Head of Training and Engagement, and my GWork is the online business community for LGBT students, graduates, business professionals, and all those who believe in true workplace equality. We're going to give it a couple of minutes just for everyone to come in, but hopefully you're enjoying WorkFair. WorkFair is today, it's our very first annual career event, so I hope that you've managed to navigate through the halls virtually, of course, pop in with some of our employers and have that real-time conversation, but also be tuning in to some of the webinars that we've had today. And I know following this one a little bit later, if you didn't see Sasha earlier and my colleague Lau, we've got mentoring and a panel on mental health still to come. My neighbours builders are being incredibly disrespectful, so you can also hear some very wonderful drilling in the background. I'm going to try and see how I can soften that down. But as per usual, you know how it works with a My GWork event. Please let us know where you're dialing in from on the chat. We'd love to hear where you're from. If anything throughout today's session resonates with you, please just let us know. If you have any questions for our wonderful panelists, and they really are an amazing group of panelists, then please do pop them in the Q&A and we'll go through that way. I'm not in charge today. This is so great. I have an amazing co-host, Laura Rose, who is going to be taking everyone through the drill today. And then Laura, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone first and foremost.
Thanks, Chloe. That was a lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. So some of you may know me. I'm one of the founders of the LGBT Mummies Tribe, which is an organisation that educates, shares and celebrates LGBT plus women and people on the path to motherhood or parenthood globally. So I have been given the honour of hosting today this amazing panel with these amazing people, and we're going to be talking to them about their lived experiences, their guidance and advice on others wanting to start a family and where to start in regards to LGBTQ plus parenting. So firstly, we will be hearing from Michael, which will be amazing. So Michael, if you want to hit it off for us.
Of course. I'm going to share my screen if that's all still okay with everybody. So just bear with me 1 second. There we go. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Michael Johnson Ellis, and I am a gay dad to 2 children through UK Surrogacy. I'm also the co-founder of Two Dads UK, the Modern Family Show, and my Surrogacy Journey. So about me and my family. So this is my motley crew in the middle here. That's my husband, Wes, and our 4-year-old Tallulah, and our 18-month-old boy, and his name's Duke. What I wanted to do today is just to give you a bit of background as to who we are and take you through our journey to become parents. This is myself, and here you'll see Tallulah being held by Katie. Now, Katie is Wes's 16-year-old daughter from a previous straight marriage. So when I met Wes, Katie was 6 years old, and she's now giving us all types of trouble now at age 16. Down at the bottom there, you can see Duke and Tallulah. So essentially what we do through our work is help raise awareness about families like ours and help to destigmatise surrogacy by ways of storytelling and campaigning for equal treatment of surrogates and intended parents. So for our history then, as I mentioned, I met Wes at Birmingham Pride in June 2012. I went to Pride just for a laugh with my mates, not thinking I would meet a boy and end up getting married to him and having kids with him. So I was newly single, and I got to Pride thinking I was there going to be hanging out with my mates. And then in actual fact, I met Wes within the first 15 minutes of arriving at Pride. We had an incredible relationship and a start to our relationship. He was working in London on the London 2012 Games, and I was based in Birmingham, as it was a Birmingham Pride event. We moved pretty quick. We got engaged in about the November time, and it was around about that time that we started thinking about surrogacy. Now, for us, surrogacy was always the route to build our family. It was always the options that we spoke about most. And that's not being anti-adoption or anti-fostering or co-parenting, but surrogacy for us just felt right, and that's what we wanted to do. We also had that discussion quite early on about how many children we would ideally like, and who essentially would go first in terms of producing the first biological child. As Wes already had Katie, we had decided that I would be using my sperm first once we had found ourselves an egg donor. So fast forward a little bit. So March 2013, that's when our research starts to really ramp up. We start exploring international surrogacy as well as UK surrogacy. Back in 2013, it was still possible for people in the UK to explore surrogacy in places like Guadalajara in Mexico, in India, in Thailand, Nepal, Cambodia, obviously the US and Canada. Now, all of those countries either became non-friendly to LGBTQ people, or they were no longer allowed for non-nationals to access surrogacy in that particular country. And at that time, we couldn't afford treatment in the US or Canada, as it's in excess of £100,000, close to 200,000 if you opt for a US journey. So we decided to go through a UK surrogacy journey. UK surrogacy is perfectly legal. It's altruistic, which means your surrogate is reimbursed reasonable expenses only. Those expenses vary from between £0 all the way up to about £15,000 to £16,000 per pregnancy. It depends on your surrogate, and it depends on their personal circumstances. So we got married in August 2014, and then it was around about just near Christmas that we decided that the UK was our route. So we began speaking to a number of non-profit organisations that can support you on a journey through surrogacy. In the UK, there are 4 not-for-profits that you can approach: Surrogacy UK, Brilliant Beginnings, COTS, and My Surrogacy Journey. They're the 4 organisations that are recognised by the HFEA, which is the regulator for fertility treatment in the UK. As all of them had all of their, with the exception of My Surrogacy Journey, because it hadn't been formed, but as the other 3 had all their books closed in that time, we couldn't register with them. So we had to embark on what's known as an independent surrogacy journey. And what that meant was we had to find our own surrogates, choose our own clinic, and essentially work unsupported throughout the entire journey. Unknown to us that was probably the best thing that could have happened, because it meant we could learn more and certainly absorb more information with regards to the surrogacy communities and network, and make a ton more friends and contacts that would later go on to help us forge My Surrogacy Journey. So in about December, January time, we began building our profile, and we joined a number of online communities to build our profile as intended parents. A lot of people compare this to dating, really. You're building a profile to explain what it is you want to achieve out of your surrogacy journey. Obviously, to become parents in a particular time frame, using my sperm initially, and then my husband's. In February, we started talking to a surrogate in 2015. So Caroline messaged us, and we began doing what's called getting to know, or GTK. We were getting to know her over the period of between 6 to 7 months, and it was about that time that we decided to choose our fertility clinic. Now, Caroline had been sterilised, so she had 4 children of her own, and she was married, and that meant that what challenges that could later pose for us when we were applying for our parental order, which I'll come on to in a minute. But Caroline offered to be our surrogate, and she was a gestational carrier, which meant she wasn't using her eggs. She would be having our embryo transferred into her. So our IVF journey began in December 2015. Our clinic in Manchester found us an egg donor, and we matched that donor to Wes's characteristics. So we matched a donor that was blonde and blue, blue eyes, blonde hair, to Wes's characteristics, as that was his. In 2016, we transferred, on the 13th of February 2016, we transferred our first embryo. We then disappeared skiing for a week, and we got a call from our surrogate after about 8 days, just letting us know that she was pregnant, which was amazing news. And then we embarked on our journey and our pregnancy. We had a reasonably smooth pregnancy, a couple of issues helping to educate the NHS and navigate that particular process, being two men and what that would look like. We eventually went on to help rewrite government guidance for surrogates and intended parents with the Department of Health and Social Care. And that guidance was then issued out to all healthcare professionals. What we later discovered, or what we discovered at the time, is that there were a number of NHS trusts which just weren't quite prepared for surrogacy. And as surrogacy is on the rise in the UK, with approximately 500 children plus a year being born through surrogacy, it's rising by about 15% year on year now. So the NHS and certainly healthcare professionals were needing to have more resource and more educational content around how to prepare for birthing with LGBTQ people and heterosexuals that were opting for surrogacy. So all of that remained positive. We had a wonderful experience with the trust. They really complied with what we were looking for. And then on the 16th of October, 2016, Tallulah was born weighing a healthy 8 pounds. From there, we decided to set up Two Dads UK as we started blogging and on our Instagram talking about our particular fertility journey. And that was receiving quite a lot of positive interaction from people wanting to learn more about surrogacy or wanting more support. And to this date, we've supported over 300 people have a journey through surrogacy and become parents through guiding and supporting them through their own pathway. We then decided we wanted more children, and then in June 2018 we began our treatment again, this time with Wes fertilizing those eggs, and we transferred one embryo into our surrogate in June. Unfortunately, that didn't work, and we had a later disaster with all of our other embryos, and they all failed and died, and we needed to start our treatment all over again. Something which is super, super rare, but nevertheless was an absolute disaster for us. So we had a friend approach us back in the winter of 2018, and she came forward and wanted to donate her eggs to us for us to complete our family. She donated her eggs, and then in December, that one embryo was transferred into our surrogate again for safekeeping. And on New Year's Eve in 2018, our surrogate did another pregnancy test, which was positive. We then, throughout 2019, continued to do the work that we do, campaigning and working hard from a Two Dads UK perspective. And then in August of 2019, on the 20th of August, Duke was born weighing 7 pounds 10, looking really miserable, being removed 2 weeks early. That's our particular journey. In terms of the other work that we've done recently, we also work to campaign hard from a fertility point of view, and also work and co-share the Modern Family Show, which is a UK family building event taking place this September. And our more recent non-profit, My Surrogacy Journey. Thanks for listening, everybody. You've been watching Michael Johnson Ellis, and that's Two Dads UK and my journey to parenthood.
Thanks, Michael. As always, really a pleasure to hear from you and hear what an amazing journey you and Wes and your family have been on, and how inspiring it is for so many other people, not just within our community, but also within the heterosexual community as well, because you do help both communities. What we want to do now is introduce you as well to our amazing panel, hear a bit more about their own journeys and their lived experience. I'll give an introduction, a quick one to mine, just so people who may connect and have that same kind of journey, have a listen. So I am a lesbian married mother of 2 children. I've been married for 10 years together with my wife, 14, and we have 2 children, IUI, one which my wife carried. Our daughter is nearly 7. Our son I carried, who's 3.5, and I am currently pregnant from trying to conceive during the pandemic, as you do, after secondary infertility, with our third on our 5th attempt, which moved to IVF. So I am about 7.5 months pregnant. So that's our journey. So we've had IUI and IVF. And yeah, I'd love to hear more from our amazing panelists, so you can all share your journeys and experiences. So Alistair, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, no problem. So
Thank you.
I'm Al Weddell. My husband and I are gay dads. We went through a surrogacy journey as well. Originally, we anticipated that would be a US surrogacy journey, but actually, in the end, we were really lucky and found a surrogate in the UK, a friend of Toby's family who came forward to help us. So our journey was a bit of a hybrid, and our son Max was born in January, just before the pandemic and lockdown and everything. So he timed it quite well because he got to meet all his family members, and he's turning 15 months in a week.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing, Alistair. That's wonderful. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Karen, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your journey.
Sure. My name is Karen Kropp. I live in New York City with my partner, Stephanie, who is a professor. And we have two sons. Daniel is 19 and Eli is almost 16. And we we each gave birth to one of the boys using IUI and IVF. And I think that this could be a great, interesting panel, and bringing a different, maybe a perspective that doesn't seem so long ago, but I think a lot has changed over the last 20 years since we began our journey. So, looking forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. Very, very similar journeys as well. So I'd love to hear more about yours. Nikki, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. My name is Nikki Kenwright. I'm currently in the northwest of England on the Wirral, as we said before. Not quite as exotic as New York, unfortunately, but it's nice and sunny today. My husband and I, Sam, have got two children. We have a 10-year-old daughter, Sienna, and my oldest, Dan, who's watching now. I hope I don't embarrass you too much, Dan. He's watching me on Facebook. He came out as trans 3 years ago, so I'm here from the perspective of my journey as a parent to a trans child and the journey that we've been on together.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nikki. And I'm sure that you're not going to embarrass him. I'm sure you're going to make him super proud.
I can't guarantee that.
If you're watching, Dan, your mum is a superstar. She'll be amazing. So thanks for that, Nikki. Gaetan, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Apologies if I haven't. Is that correct?
It's all right. It's good.
Good. If you can share, that'd be great.
Nice to meet you all, and happy to be here. My journey is slightly different. I'm a French guy, but I'm based in London. I've been here for 18 years now, and I'm a gay father, but via the co-parenting route. So we have an 11-year-old son, Isaac, who is living with me and with his mom, and we're sharing his custody. And we went through a whole process of how we set up our co-parenting and how did we get there. And I can share that later, but the experience through the NHS in 2008, 2007 to plan it was absolutely incredible. So me as a foreign guy, looking at this experience, I was very impressed. So I'm happy to share that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gaetan. And I think it's so great that we've got you on the panel to share your lived experience, because there's going to be so many people out there that are looking to start their journey and aren't always aware of the different paths of parenthood. So looking at it from your path and your journey, a co-parenting perspective, it really may engage people and think that's actually right for me. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you.
Welcome.
And Jen, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jen Rumbach. I'm based in New York and I work for the United Nations. My wife and I have been together for about 5 years. We have a 3-year-old who we conceived through IUI using donor sperm from a sperm bank. And I'm also at the end of my first trimester with our second child. So I'm also pregnant. And we conceived this child using IVF, and it was with the same sperm donor. And in the end, we actually also used donor eggs from an egg bank. I can talk about that more later. Yeah, thanks.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Jen. That's so exciting. And congratulations. How are you feeling?
I feel terrible. And I thought by this panel that I would feel better. But I'm pretty miserable still. But I'm hoping that now I'm rounding into the second trimester, I'll start feeling better.
Hopefully. Your fingers crossed for you.
I'm well enough to be here. So yeah,
if you need to duck off, we all understand.
If my video when you're ready. Out, you'll know that I went to throw up. So.
Oh, bless you. Thank you for sharing and congratulations. And last but not least, Chloe, we want to hear from you as well.
Hi, I'm going to try and keep this quick. Hi everyone, I'm Chloe. So I'm a mum of two to Miles and Theo. Miles is 5, Theo is 3, and I naturally conceived after being infertile for 8 years. I have polycystic ovaries. And so I was told I'll never be able to have children on my own. It will have to be via IVF. And whatever was medically wrong fixed itself until I was on the operating table. And I ended up with the senior consultant from Homerton coming down saying, do you realise you've got a cyst? And that it had been poisoning. So Mars is actually a medical miracle. I had to sign off a waiver. They're not sure how I managed to conceive full term with something that was actually poisoning. So I've got 1 amputated ovary and 1 amputated fallopian tube. And then Theo came along, and I've never been more fertile in my life, apparently, I've been told. And I'm bisexual.
Thanks so much for sharing, Chloe. And again, there's so many women and people within our community that are affected by different fertility conditions. And yeah, your story is amazing that you went through that, and what little miracles they are, as are all of our children, all miracles. So I want to move on now that you've all introduced yourself to everyone, to ask a few questions. And we've got a few different topics because there's so many things that we can cover. Having children, identity, looking at the workplace and how you're supported, and general support and advice on what all of you would give to those that are trying to conceive or looking to start a route to parenthood. So my first question is for Gaytam. So can you please tell us about how you became a parent and what are the challenges of co-parenting? What advice would you give to parents that are looking at co-parenting on the start of their journey?
Yes, so for me it was an interesting one. We came out to decide to go on co-parenting because my relationship was with someone who was living a double life for a religious background and cultural reason. So obviously we couldn't go through the adoption, him living a double life. And our friends, Sarah and Lisa, lesbian couple, were really keen just to start this journey with us and really wanted a father for their child. So we started discussing this for a couple of months and years before actually doing it. And the interesting thing is, at the time, we wanted to make sure it was the right decision. So we approached Homerton Hospital in London. And this is why I mentioned that before, because I was very impressed how we were received, how they assisted us, not only on the medical level to make sure that physically I could obviously conceive a child, but that the biological mother could also conceive a child. So we had all the tests done in that respect for free via the NHS. And additionally to that, they gave us a counseling service whereby we could go and see a psychologist and discuss that journey and how we were going to set it up. So for me, coming from a different country, being able to have this success and to be able to discuss this and to make sure it was a safe option for us was very amazing. And in the end, we thought we were going to go through IVF, but turned out, because we were healthy, we did artificial insemination on our own. And it worked out pretty quickly because she got pregnant the 2nd month and our son was born in November 2009. So that's the kind of setup we had. Now, if you want me to talk about the challenges you mentioned, I would say that for us at the time, and it doesn't seem that long ago, it was in 2007, 2008 when we were looking into that, but we didn't know that many people. We were not aware of who was doing this that much. We went through different associations, gay association, but didn't really met people in the same scenario that we were in. But now I would say with everything has changed. There's so much communication with social media and groups and everything that is really easy to meet people like me and share experiences and deep dive and ask all the questions to make sure it is the right avenue for people, because co-parenting can work really beautifully, but at the same time can be extremely challenging for other reasons. So how do we set up expectation? How do we make it work? And just to keep it short now, because I need to pass on the message. But what I really want to highlight is actually co-parenting was extremely easy for our son, but extremely easy. For him, like it's the perfect setup. He's always been having 2 homes. is delighted, is full of love and care and attention. The challenge wasn't the child, the challenge was the parents. So how do you prepare for that? How do you look into emotion versus reason? What's more important at which stage to play with and to discuss? So that would be my advice, and this is why it's important to meet people facing the same scenario.
Perfect. Great answer. Thanks, Gautam. And Karen, if I can pass over to you, can you please tell us how you became a parent and what were the challenges for you? I know you've explained briefly.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, Stephanie and I have two sons. Daniel's 19, Eli is 15 going on 16. I always wanted to have children, and believe it or not, 20 years ago, it just was not assumed that gay men and lesbians would become parents. People who are just a little older than I am were excluded from both the societal and technological changes that made parenting possible for us. We used artificial insemination and an anonymous donor. Stephanie was always a little uncomfortable with all the questions that people ask, like, who was the donor? Was it the same donor? How did you do this? Who gave birth to whom? All those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
I was never really uncomfortable with it and didn't feel like it invaded my own privacy. And I always thought that sharing information helped destigmatize it for people who come after us. But now, as the boys are older, I tend to think that it's their information to share at this point and not mine. In any case, Stephanie and I did each give birth to one of the boys, but we had to adopt the other one since in 2005, when Eli was born, we weren't allowed to put two moms on the birth certificate. So I imagine that this is hopefully different for Jen at this point. So in order to make sure that each kid had the legal protections of having two parents, we had to do a second parent adoption. So imagine we had to pay a lawyer. We had to have a social worker do a home study to make sure that our home, in which both our children was born to two parents, was appropriate for the child to be adopted, right? So that was a little crazy. I think that changed within a few years of Eli being born, and it certainly changed when gay marriage was legalized in the US. And some of that feels like ancient history. We have teenagers now, and the challenges are certainly different. Probably the biggest being how we fit in as a family with other families at the kids' schools. That was complicated by the fact that we're in New York City and they don't go to neighborhood schools. They don't play in Little League. And our largely gay social circle didn't end up being their social circle. So we never felt like we were a part of the social network that comes from the kids' schools that I think that most parents develop in kind of other family settings. And then one last thing is, I think our kids' friends know that their parents are gay, but sometimes something comes up where it's clear that they don't, and that can be funny. That can be funny. Daniel told us a story last year that he was in some conversation with friends, and they must have been, he was a senior in high school, so they were talking about applying to colleges and things like that. And he was talking about his mom, and one of his friends in his group said, "Oh, your mom went to Amherst, right?" And he said, "No, that's my other mom. This mom went to Penn." And the kid looks at him and says, "Your other mom? You have two moms?" He's a senior in high school. He's been in school with him for a long time. And he says, "You have two moms? Are your moms lesbians?" And he actually answered, "No, they're really good friends who are co-parenting together." And the kid says, "What? Really?" And he says, "No, they're lesbians, you idiot." So
bless him.
Things come up.
They do. They definitely do. I think many of us know those random questions do arise. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing. Jen, pass over to you. Can you please talk more about your family and how you started it? So we heard a bit at the beginning, but we can go into a bit more depth.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say I got started, building my family a little bit later in life. I'm in my 40s. I worked overseas with the UN for all of my 30s. And, the places that I was working in Iraq and other places in the Middle East and Eastern Nepal. So they just weren't places where I could start a family. partly because for a lot of that time, I was single. And so it would have been really difficult for me, or even impossible, to be a single parent in the locations where I was working. But also because there just wasn't, it wasn't possible to undergo assisted conception with donor sperm in any of the countries that I lived in. I would have had to travel, back to the US or to Europe. And I think for anyone who's gone through assisted fertility and done rounds of IUI and IVF, you know that that's, you can't really just like pop in and do a round of IUI and then pop back out because timing is so difficult. And also I was just constantly traveling. So I finally got a 6-year posting in New York City with the UN. And so I basically hit the ground running when I arrived and said, now is the time that I want to start building a family. And I was 40 at that point. So with my first child, I did 6 rounds of IUI, got pregnant twice, had 2 miscarriages. And then on the 6th round, it worked. So that, I thought that was like a fairly easy process for me, considering my age. And then after I had the first child, I pretty quickly started trying to get pregnant with our second child. I thought it would be easy again, but it unfortunately wasn't. It took me a couple of years. I did 10 rounds of IUI. I had a really hard time letting go of IUI that time. Before I finally moved on to IVF, I did a few rounds of IVF with my own eggs, had a miscarriage. And so finally, we just decided, for financial reasons and time reasons, we're due to move to another country next year or the year after. So we just decided to move to donor eggs and conceive that way. And we were able to conceive right away with donor eggs. So I carried the first pregnancy and I'm carrying the second one. So that's our story of how we had our first child and are pregnant with our second. And it's interesting, Karen, to hear you talk about second parent adoption, because unfortunately, that's still something that most of the queer couples we know are doing. It's in New York State, there's actually just a new law passed in February that you can do sort of a modified process. And Tara's, my wife's name, is on the birth certificate for our first child. But the laws differ in different states. And so a lot of people we know are really nervous about having parental rights challenged, the name on the birth certificate not being recognized, especially if they move to a different state. So people are still going through this horrendous process of having social worker visit and having to prove that you're an ideal parent. We started the process and then things were so chaotic after the birth of our first child, we actually haven't finished it, but we did plan to do that, especially if we're going to move back overseas in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much, Jen. And you've had such a difficult journey. It's amazing that, what you've been through, and so many people are going to be able to relate to what you've been through, especially with loss and multiple cycles. So thank you for sharing that. Do have another quick question in regards to having children for you. Can you tell us about raising your child in a gender neutral way? Because this will be something really interesting for a lot of the people watching. And why did you make the decision, and what are your tips for other parents wanting to do the same? If you could just cover that for us briefly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have to say, I don't think we really consciously set out to raise our first child in a gender neutral way, but it just sort of happened because of the circumstances of where we live and how we ourselves approach gender. So we live in Brooklyn. We have a community with lots of queer parents, but also non-queer parents. And I think that there's just not really a focus on gender amongst the parents that we're friends with. They don't really talk about it. All the kids kind of wear clothes that would be both for boys and girls. And I think, it's really common for people to use neutral language, like talk about little kids or toddlers rather than little girls or boys. So I think, the only way that Zenny, our 3-year-old, would really be aware of gender is through pronouns that we use for people. We also have found a lot of books that are gender neutral. We love the book, What Makes a Baby, which talks about conception. And it talks about, people who have sperm in their body, people who have eggs in their body, rather than attaching conception to a particular gender. So that's helped a lot. But, we recently sort of questioned, like, does any even know about gender and that, like, society assigns everyone a gender? Like, should we explain this more, in more detail, especially because in the US, I think it's kind of impossible to raise a child gender neutral for very long, because once they go to school, gender's everywhere. And we don't really have gender neutral schools here the way they do in some, I think, of like the Scandinavian countries. So we've been kind of looking for books that can explain sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender to someone who's 3. We haven't found anything. Maybe we'll have to write it. I don't know. We found books for older kids, which are great, but I do training on sexual orientation, gender identity for the UN. And so but this is hard for me to explain to someone who's so small. So it's something that we're working on. But I think, if you want to intentionally raise your child as gender neutral, I think it's about just being committed to letting your child play with whatever they want, dress however they want, avoid using gendered language. And then I think the most important part is just to really find a community where everyone's doing the same, so that it doesn't even come up and it's not really even a question. And if you can, find a school where they also have that philosophy, if you live in a place where that exists, I guess.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that. And Chloe, did you always want to become a parent? Was it something you always aspired to do?
Did I always want to become a parent? I wanted to be a mum since I was probably about 17 or 18. It's always been quite an inherent part of myself. And I'm always the mum of my friend groups, no matter how I try and be the separate. So I was in a long-term relationship and kind of had thought about children until polycystic ovaries. So for those that don't know, it means that your ovaries are larger than normal. They're normally double the size. So when you are having a cycle, so a period cycle, normally what happens is the egg goes through, it dissipates, and then obviously that's why you have a period. Unfortunately, with PCOS, it won't break apart. It will keep going, and then it gathers and gathers and gathers, which can create a cyst. And in worst case scenarios, they explode. So I was actually engaged at the time. I had a cyst explode. They thought it was appendicitis. I was in hospital for 3 days until someone went, maybe we should do an ultrasound. And they did, and they said, you've got polycystic ovaries. So I saw a gynecologist, and he said, look, I'll be really honest with you. We don't think it will be possible for you to have a child, because my periods were every 6 months. I had irregular cycles, and even then they're quite volatile, and I would end up in hospital. So the idea of actually ever being a parent again was pretty devastating, because I just thought, when I feel like it and I'm ready, like, it will happen. And so they said the only way you'll be pregnant is through IVF. I'm not going to lie, it was really hard at the beginning to forget every single thing that I had thought and I'd known and dreamed since I was a little girl, to be this mum. So I tried everything I possibly could to just take children out of the equation and move forward. I had just seen a gynecologist again for the first time in 8 years, and we were talking about regulating my cycle again, possibly going back on the pill. Didn't really feel too great. If you've been pregnant before, you know what that feels like. Somebody just feels a little off. So I took a test, and I took another test because I started laughing. I thought it was really hilarious. And I thought, I can't be pregnant. It's not real. And I was actually in a bar at the time. I'm telling too many stories. And so I took this test, and I was pregnant. And I was already pregnant when I'd seen the gynecologist. And so a high risk pregnancy the whole way through, because of my past. And then again, like I said, on the operating table, and I actually had my children at Homerton. It's an amazing hospital. They're really such a wonderful team. And the senior consultant came down and said, oh, Miss Davies, do you realise you've got a cyst? And they said, you've got post-PCOS. And I had planned to have a natural birth. Miles decided to poo after 25 hours at 1 centimetre dilated and 1 minute latent contractions. So I ended up having an epidural. Should have had that the whole way through. For me, it was perfect. They came out the sunroof, and I was high as a kite as this woman was talking to me, and she said, oh, do you realise that you've got polycystic ovaries? I said, yes, I know. She said, do you realise you've got a cyst? And I said, no. She said, I had the cyst about that big, and it had flipped, and the whole thing had transverse. The fallopian tube had wrapped around it, cutting off the blood supply. Gosh. And it had all gone, I always say this word wrong, it had all gone gangrenous. So in essence, I had a perfect ovary and fallopian tube. I had miles in the center, and then I had one that actually was secreting poison to the rest of my system. So that's why they have no idea how I managed to conceive in the first place, to carry him for 8 months and 3 weeks. I almost went full term. I gave birth to him at 39 weeks. And he came out happy and healthy and whole. So yeah, I went back and met the medical team, and they asked me all these really crazy questions. I was like, I don't know how I did it. But yeah, he's listening to YouTube. He's watching London Underground videos. What would be my advice? I don't think you can really tell yourself to not dream. I think I just always believe if it's meant to happen, it will happen. And for me, children were children. Thanks, Miles. It was never about how I had my children. I was going to have a family regardless. So whether it was I was going to adopt, or, you know, I was going to ask a family member to, you know, surrogacy, like whatever, that for me it was just about having a family. And that's the peace of mind that I gave myself, is they don't have to come from me. I just have to love them.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chloe. What an amazing story and journey. Nikki, so we're going to talk about identity now, and we want to hear more about Dan's and your family's journey. So it'd be amazing to hear more about that. Can you please tell us about Dan and how he came out, and also how his life has changed since he's come out?
So Dan came out to us when he was 11. He's an August baby, so he's young in the school year. So Dan had just started high school and worked really hard, and had gone to an all-girls grammar school. And it was in the September. He literally, it seemed to us as his parents that he left junior school in the July as a fairly happy child, and then started high school in the September. I promised I wouldn't get upset in here ago.
Don't be silly, honestly, Nikki. It's fine. It does bring up emotions. You're fine.
Yeah. Basically, it just felt like the wheels fell off a bit after that. He left a note on my bed that just said, "I don't think I'm a girl. I'm not sure if I'm a boy. Maybe we can agree." What did he say? Maybe we can land somewhere in between, and I can be gender neutral. But there was language that he used that I thought, he's obviously been, he's been looking this up, and he's really thought about this. I hope you don't hate me and kick me out.
Oh, bless.
As if, yeah. And I just went and took him in my arms, and we both cried. And I haven't stopped crying since, really. But it was just he was just broken at that stage. I think we'd always known that he was somewhere on the LGBTQ plus rainbow. But to be honest, I hadn't necessarily thought that he was trans. I don't know where he was going to land. And it didn't, I wasn't bothered. He was my child. You just love them no matter what. But when he came out as trans, I was just filled with fear for what that would mean for him. And, the operations, it's just a path that you don't want your child. If he wanted to be a boy, I want him to be a boy. I don't want him to have to go through this process. I just wanted him to be happy, but he was just absolutely miserable, obviously exacerbated by the fact that he was in an all-girls school. And because it was quite an old-fashioned grammar school, they just didn't know how to deal with him. I drove Dan to school the following morning and went straight into school with him because he wanted me to go in. So we told the teachers pretty much before we told anybody else. Although most of his classmates knew and were already calling him Dan. And we were still using female pronouns and his birth name at that point as well in the family. Okay. And then it just kind of evolved from there. We took him to his face used to be closed. I said his face was always down. His eyes were always half closed. His body language was he was just miserable. I said he was broken. And we went through some therapy with him, which didn't really work, because what also came out of the process was that Dan has got autism. He's on the high end of the spectrum. So face-to-face therapy just didn't work for him because he doesn't want to talk to people. And to be honest, since then, it's just been a journey. It's been a journey for us, but just listening to him, staying really close to him, physically and sort of emotionally. He was self-harming. We ended up in A&E at one point because he was threatening suicide, and I think that was the turning point for me, and that was about 18 months later, because I'd been struggling with the pronouns and his name, because I tried to explain it to him, and all the way through I was totally honest with him and just said, this is why I'm feeling this way, and this is, we're absolutely behind you, but this is why I'm maybe getting a little bit upset sometimes. Please don't think I'm not accepting what you're going through, because I absolutely am. It's just a slightly different take on it for me because I'm your mum. And when we came out of A&E, it was just like a light switched in my head, and I thought, why am I getting so upset? Why am I so attached to this name that doesn't matter? Why am I so bothered about it? And I didn't use his previous name or pronouns. I just didn't use any name at all. So it certainly kept my steps up, because instead of shouting him for dinner, I had to run up down the stairs all the time and knock on the door because I couldn't shout his name. And I'd do this weird thing in conversations if he was there, and where I had to use a pronoun, I'd turn around and say, don't you? And it was just this, and I was tying myself in knots, and it was making me really stressed as well. And it was literally after that, I just thought, forget it. I don't care what he wants to call himself. The pronouns were just, everything changed from that day. When we came out of A&E, I went straight into school and said I want all of his records changed to Dan. We started using male pronouns at home, and it's just been an upward journey from there, really. So we've sort of struggled for about 18 months, but then since then we've just made tons of progress for him. And at the centre, it was always what was best for him, but in the background as a parent, I was sort of struggling with it emotionally, and my husband was as well, because you have this strange sense of loss for the child that you think you're losing, even though you're not at all. It's really difficult to explain because he's still there in front of me. It's the same person he always was. It's just not quite the same as I guess we thought it would be, but yeah, it's been a bit of a journey.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's so brave of you to share. And there's probably so many people. I've actually seen something pop up in the chat from a lady, and I won't mention her name for privacy reasons, that's commented on one of her children coming out as trans. And it's so inspiring to hear your journey. Not only that Dan has a journey of his own, but the fact that you've been so supportive through that, to know that people can sit there as a parent and also as a child and listen and say, actually, there are parents just like Nikki. My parents could be like Nikki and could support me, and that may help them to then come out to their parents. So thank you so much. It's so crucial that we have people like yourself sharing your journey as well. And I'm sure Dan's sitting there with a beaming smile on his face, really proud of you. So thank you so much.
He'll be cringing now.
They always cringe at their own parents, but they are secretly proud of us. So I'm sure he is. Thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you.
Jen, an identity question for you. What has been your experience of living abroad as a same-sex family? How have you found that?
Yeah, so we actually haven't lived abroad as a same-sex family yet, because all the time that I was living abroad, I was unmarried. I didn't have children. And we have traveled quite a lot with the three of us together, including to places like Brazil and Ukraine. But, we haven't experienced any problems. And I think, traveling, of course, is so different than actually moving to a country and trying to become part of a community. But, now that I have a family, it's definitely changed sort of my concepts of where I'm willing to work. And it's something that we think about a lot and talk about a lot, since I am up for rotation to move to a new post next year or the year after. There's sort of like an expectation in the UN system for a lot of staff that at some point you will live apart from your children and your spouse. I mean, usually I have to say this is men, heterosexual men, who end up separating from their wives and children, who are, based in one country, and then they go work in some hardship duty station. But the, expectation, I think, is also extended to other staff, other parents. And, as somebody with just such young children and one on the way, I obviously am not willing to do that at this point. in my career. I think for me, it might be down the road when my children are, much older or even grown, at which point I'll basically be retired. So I don't know if it would ever happen. So yeah, I just, we don't want to be posted in a country where Tara wouldn't be able to get residency, or where her residency would in some way be precarious or be based on some kind of visa that, could be revoked. We don't want to live in a country where we could potentially be targeted or expelled because of our family makeup. I've gotten deported from one country before because of the LGBTIQ plus work I do. And that's not something that it was actually while I was pregnant with Zenny. And that's not something I would put my family through. So yeah, I'm just a bit all around, like I'm sort of a bit reluctant to move to a lot of countries that would be open to me. And there's also the concern of, for me, I think Tara's a bit less concerned about this, but I just have the concern about raising my children in a place where they'll be the only kids that have same-sex parents, the only kids that have a donor parent. And the nice thing about being in Brooklyn is that half of our community is comprised of donor kids. So there's nothing unusual about that for them. Yeah. So all of that is kind of going into our thinking. I mean, honestly, if we can move to like London or Geneva next, that would be great. But if not, I think there'll be some big decisions to make about my career and how to move forward.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jen.
Yeah.
Chloe, how do you speak to your kids about identity?
It's everywhere in our house.
Brilliant.
I am who I am. It's not going to change. So my kids love mum, so they're going to love everything about me. My best friend's non-binary. Half my friends are either gay people, lesbian, and it was really important for me that my children are used to us because we're a family. So their godparents are made up of not only heterosexual but LGBTQ plus people, and we all talk about it. It's funny, in the journey of parenting, I'm actually parenting my parents. So at the weekend I was talking to my dad because my best friend, we were clearing out my grandmother's house, and I was saying, I heard them use he, and I was like, okay Dad, we talked about this, so I need you to get used to saying they or them because they're really important to me. It's natural for my kids. My parents look after my kids traditionally during Pride Week when I have volunteer work, and I make a point of talking about it with them. Plus, it's everywhere. My bisexual flag is in my room. Utilizing our existence in as best possible way I can by just making it part of their everyday. If it's not me, someone that their mum knows or that they know as someone who loves them is from the LGBT community. So I'm just trying to teach my children, look, do they love you? If they love you, it doesn't really matter where they come from or what they look like. My children are of mixed heritage, so I don't really have time. I'm already dealing with race. I'm not also going to deal with being LGBTQ plus. You either just love everybody, or otherwise mum's going to have a few issues with you, and then we'll be threatening those going back to Africa things like my parents did to me. So but yeah, I grew up with LGBT godparents and LGBT people in my life, and for me they were just like other people. So I'm just trying to do the same thing for my kids as best I can. But I tell all the parents when I go to school, because everyone assumes because my partner is a man that I'm straight. I'm like, no, that's not the case, and actually this is my job and this is what I do. And they're suddenly asking so many more questions in the program, which is also a little interesting. But I made a point to tell the school I work in LGBT, in the LGBT space, and I'm LGBT, so that I wouldn't have that othering that I know can be quite uncomfortable. Because I get it in so many other facets.
And it's so good, isn't it? We all want to bring our children up to be accepting of all people, specifically coming from the LGBTQ plus community. They're going to have enough questions. So to teach them to have that love for everyone is so crucial. So thank you so much for sharing that. Talking about workplace now. So Gaetan, what has been your experience of being a parent in the workplace? How's it been for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me on that front, it's been pretty easy. If I'm honest with you, I work in London. I work in media, online advertising. I work on social media space anyway. So very full of queer people, LGBT, and even straight people being very accepting. So it's been easy. I've never hidden anything. I went through my journey with my colleagues. I think everybody was kind of keen to understand how that worked and really understanding on how my child was growing within that context. And I think what's interesting now that he's 11 and I can see what he's making of it and how, what he's telling me and how I can just share that with my work colleagues and everything. It's all of us learning at the same time. So I've been very lucky at work. I have to say that I've always been international the way I work, and I'm in charge of Africa and the Middle East. So I really resonate with what Jen said. And for me, funny enough, my child actually helped me to interact in certain countries with society, because obviously everybody knows I'm a gay guy. But sometimes the conversation is uncomfortable in certain countries. So the fact I have a child is actually something they can relate to. So they see me also as a father, and then they start changing the perspective about who I am as a gay person. So in that respect, my son actually helped me a lot to overcome some challenges about preconceived ideas about gay people. So that was the interesting part. But yes, I have to say, I've been extremely lucky with work because of that. I've got some friends in the financial industry or the legal industry who haven't been as lucky as I am in terms of being open and being supported. So I'm aware I'm part of the lucky ones.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really interesting perspective, Gaetan. Thank you for that. Alistair, what about you? How have you found it in the workplace?
Yeah, so similarly to Gaetan, actually, I work in media. I work for UK TV, which is part of BBC Studios. So I think we're as an industry probably quite lucky in terms of how things are. But UK TV have been really great. When I first said that I was going through a surrogacy journey and that I wanted to take, I ended up taking the full year last year off, but originally I was sort of thinking it would be 9 months that I would take off, but they were really cool with it from the get-go. There wasn't a surrogacy policy before, but they very quickly produced one on my behalf, which was it basically, I guess, kind of a mix of the maternity policy that already existed in the adoption policy as well. But really that gave me the same rights that any parent would have in terms of being able to take a year off, having paid leave, having, all of that kind of thing going through. And generally, now that I'm back at work, the company's been really great in terms of work-life balance. Obviously we're all kind of working from home and kind of going through the issues with lockdown and so forth. But the approach is very much, put your work-life balance and your family life first. So I feel really, really supported from that perspective. And then the other thing that UKTV has done for, and this is for all parents returning to work at the moment, is putting some coaching in place as well. New parent coaching, and weirdly, and I've spoken to a number of my other colleagues who are also going through the same coaching process, is that you end up not talking about the kids and the parenting aspects at all. It's all about issues at work that you need to navigate through. So I think it's great that the family aspects are never the issue. It's always something else.
Brilliant. It's so great to hear that you've got a similar experience, Alistair, where you're supported. So it sounds like UKTV are doing a great job of looking after you all.
Yeah,
Karen,
definitely.
thanks so much, Alistair. Karen, what's your experience been as a lesbian mother in the workplace, and what is your organisation, Fit Group, doing to support you? What would you like to share some of your successes with them?
Yeah, I think first, some of what everyone else is saying really resonates. One of the things that seems really true is that once you become a parent, being gay is easier in the workplace because they move on to you're a parent, and people can relate to that perhaps more than they can relate to you as a gay man or a lesbian. I think I've actually been really lucky. I've been in 2 long-term jobs since we had the boys, and both places were and continue to be supportive of us as a family. I work in finance, and certainly the job I was in when I had Daniel was a much more conservative place. And yet, and I'm sure I was the only person in anybody's circle there who was gay, who was frankly female, who was a lesbian, who was Jewish. I mean, it was sort of it was really an old boys club, and they were extremely supportive of me as a mom and us as a family, as is Fitch Group, where I've been for 12 years now.
Amazing.
And this is even true of my partner. You know, she's a professor at the Jewish Conservative Movement Seminary, and they're completely supportive of her as a parent as well. So one thing that comes up a lot is when you are in the workplace, is that if you're in a meeting with people who are outside of the organization, that conversation, you know, inevitably turns to children as a kind of normal warm up for the meeting, right? You're chatting about what you're doing, and those conversations inevitably lead to my coming out, because once I'm talking about my family, it's the whole family. So I just think that's a different kind of dynamic for people in ways that seem important to me. You know, Fitch Group is doing the right thing. Any benefits that families receive, and from what I know, and certainly from what's just been mentioned here, they are far less than what you would receive in the UK. But any benefits that families receive, we receive. You know, whether it's health insurance for families or Christmas parties for kids, you know, my kids are involved too. And Fitch is doing outreach to the LGBTQ community through our Fitch Pride network, and through events like this one. So Fitch, I work specifically in public finance, which is generally considered a pretty progressive arm of the finance world. And so from the very first moment that I was at Fitch, you know, I felt comfortable being there as a lesbian and as a mom and in a queer family. So, you know, the experience has generally been really good for me over the 20 years since I started trying to have kids, and you know, since we've had the kids.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. Great to hear how positive and inclusive they're being and supportive.
Yeah.
Jen, can you tell us a bit more about, I'm really nosy, so you'll realise that, all of you. Tell a bit more about the work that you do at the UN, and especially UN Globe, to support LGBTQ plus parents, and what is still to be done. Because I'm sure people would love to hear.
I mean, first, I want to just echo what Karen and others have said, which is that it's true that when you have children, you're suddenly like more human to everyone, and you're so much more relatable, and you have something to talk about that you can connect on. So it has been a really interesting journey to see how, you know, I work with people all over the world, and it's interesting to see how I can sort of connect with people on a different level now that I have a 3-year-old, and we can like commiserate about 3-year-olds and all of that. But in the UN, so I sit on the board of the UN Globe, which is a voluntary organization that represents LGBTIQ plus personnel in the UN system. We have a massive amount of work to do in the UN for LGBTIQ plus families. We've made some strides over the last 5 years or so, but I think there's just a huge amount of work still to be done. One of the top priorities for us is to push for inclusive parental leave policies that treat all families equally, regardless of whether you're adopting children, having them gestationally yourself, or having them through surrogacy. What we're seeing now in the UN is that a number of agencies, including my own, have released gender neutral leave policies that don't, they refer to gestational parent, non-gestational. So we've at least taken mother, father, and all the gender out of it. But for instance, in my organization, as a gestational parent, you would get 24 weeks out of the office. But if you adopt or use surrogacy, you only get 8 weeks. So we still see a huge disparity in a lot of agencies between the different kinds of, ways to have children. We also push for equal pension benefits for all staff members. And one of our big areas of work is on mobility options. So, going back to my own story, we just believe that every family should have the right to feel safe and secure where they're working. And we also think that the UN should recognize, they have what they call designated family duty stations and non-family duty stations. And we feel that, they need to recognize that a quote family duty station is not a family duty station for everyone. It's a family duty station for a heterosexual family who has children who are all cisgender, heterosexual, and endosex. So that's a big area of work for us. So we work at the country level, we work at the agency level, we work system-wide to try to enact these changes. And we also assist individual staff when they have issues or need support from us.
That's amazing. You're doing some great work over there, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing. And the last one in regards to the workplace, Chloe, what are your tips for organisations to create a parent-inclusive culture going forward?
Well, first off, if you've got a parent ERG, that's always the one that I ask first and foremost, because if we've got one for LGBT spaces, we've got one for race, then actually I'm always inspired by organisations that take that down a level and really look at it as parenting, because if we think about our beings, and so, the intersections of how I will come, I'm a Black woman, I'm cisgender, I'm bisexual, and I'm a working parent. So I want to be able to feed in my identity into talking about parenting and having a safe space to talk about that alongside other parents, because, as we all joked about in the pre-call, we all are like, where have we hidden our kids today? That's a shared commonality. It has nothing to do with identity, but it's recognizing that there is another layer of nuance around LGBT identities, and what does that come with the parenting journey. So having those spaces to talk about that, but really to be very diverse in their thinking of how they approach parenting, and recognizing it isn't just heteronormative. I lived with my grandparents. They were my parents for 2 years. So even when we think about what does it mean as parenting, we think about adoption, we think about, Getan and co-parenting. There are so many different ways to foster. There's so many different ways to become a parent. So it's working with organizations to be truly inclusive of their thinking of parents, especially at a time like now where, apart from you, Jen, and Karen, who are in the US, we're still very much in lockdown, and most of our children have only really gone back to school in the last couple of weeks. Nikki, like you, my eldest son is autistic. So actually thinking about what does it mean when you have a child who's also more vulnerable, that's got nothing to do with our identity. That's also about the child, but the knock-on effect is actually the more nuance and layering as a parent you're going to have to think about, and where you might need more support. So it's all around, because right now parents are probably one group that need the most support more than anyone else. Most of us are working. We're putting ourselves to one side and trying to elevate and keep our children healthy and whole, and that also all has an impact. So it's really thinking about, what does that look like in the workplace? How can we help workplaces make space for people in this way, just in the way they would make space from an LGBT perspective? How do we also have these more nuanced conversations around neurodiversity? It's not different if you're more marginalized. It's just, how do you communicate and actually make sure that we're having open dialogue, open conversation? And if it's not created, that's okay. But if you're at the beginning of the journey, to then start creating it, and hopefully calling out to your employees who are from those backgrounds to help you be that voice and create it internally. And I think that's been one of the best things to see for many of the organizations we work with and those who seek our guidance, because it's allowed us to have this space here where, we've got our community feeding into our clients and their employees. You're all parents, regardless of whether you come from a corporate background, media, or wherever. And so how do we see ourselves, and then how do you take this information back to where you work and continue the change?
Great points, Chloe. It's really, really important and poignant at the moment. There's so many organisations that are trying to do better, but unless we use our lived experience and our voices to co-create this change, it won't move forward. That's why it's so amazing to hear all of your journeys. I'm just conscious of time and how many questions I've decided to ask you all, and giving people the opportunity to ask Q&A at the end. So if we could keep to around 2 minutes, everybody, I know that's a bit slim, but I'd be much appreciated. So talk about support and advice. So Nikki, what has the support from the healthcare system and education been like for you and your family? And what would your top tips be for parents going through the same experience?
education previously was dire until we took Dan out of the school that he was in just before Christmas and moved him to a local comprehensive school, which is a Stonewall school.
Yay!
And they have been absolutely fantastic. It's like night and day, absolutely amazing. Healthcare wise, one thing I found is that my doctors is very supportive, but I need to have the answers before I go there. So we've sort of gone back and forth. I mean, an example I use quickly, we tried to get, sorry Dan, giving away all of your secret information here, but we wanted to stop his monthly cycle, which was absolutely traumatic. So I went to the doctors and just said, the contraceptive pill. Yeah, fine. So we tried that. He just wasn't happy taking that because it's a female hormone. So then we tried the injection. He's absolutely terrified of needles. So the nurse was literally chasing him around the room. So then I went back again and said, it was actually one of my friends from work, Lucy Smith, who I think might be on the panel as well, who said, what about, and it was because Dan had said, why can't they just steam it into me like a dumpling? And Lucy said, well, what about the contraceptive patch, which wasn't around when I was, so went back to the doctors. Yeah, we got it, no problem. But I had to keep on, that they didn't say to me, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And that's what the journey's been like, really. I have to have the answers before I go. And then they're more than willing to help. But it would be better if they could be a bit more proactive than reactive.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nikki. That's so true. A lot of the work we do with the NHS and campaigning is to ensure that we're not doing all of the education. It's great that we use our lived experience as families, but the education and training needs to be there at the forefront as people come into healthcare sector so that they can support families. So thank you for that. Gaeta, what has the support from Isaac's school been like?
So it's very interesting here. It's been great. I have to say, there's a big emphasis in terms of diversity and inclusion, and now it's part of the school responsibility to be inclusive and to address that anyway. So they have a duty to approach this correctly. So that was fine. I think for us, he's still in primary school. He hasn't started secondary school yet. So he's been in a place where he's been there since he was 4.5 years old. So all his friends are very supportive and they don't even question this kind of thing. But what happened recently, and I think it's a good example to share now, is more that for him, he's very proud of his heritage and he's very proud of his four parents and his gay environment and everything. And he wants to stand by that. And what happened is that in the school playground, the word gay has been used in loads of terms just to be negative and to be insulting and whatever. But this comes more from a place of perhaps what here at home, or perhaps just ignorance, not knowing what that means. So my son just went to see his teacher and the headmaster and said, they keep on using gay to insult people and not to be nice to each other, and I don't like that because I don't understand what it means. So then but he approached this, but not in a kind of traumatic way, more in a kind of they don't know what they're talking about, so we need to do something about it. So
I do. That's amazing.
Yeah, and the headmaster already approached that, and the teacher, they've done such an amazing job. They sat down the class. They said that this is not acceptable. This is what it means to be gay. This is what it means for Isaac's parents. And the teacher, somehow, a brother was gay as well, so she could explain how that relates to her, how it's important to respect each other. And actually, he opened a conversation that was really healthy for those kids to hear what that really means. So I guess the school really is aware of what needs to be done, and there's a possibility just actually to change things and to make a difference. It's our responsibility. And I guess for him, it's a small school. He's the only one with gay parents. But that was never really an issue up to now, and that's been addressed properly. So I was really pleased with that.
I bet you were really proud of him doing that at his age. That's how strong-minded is that and confident of him.
Yeah, and also it's really important for him to say that it does exist. I have two mums, I have two dads, and it does exist. So stop saying to me which one is who, because I'm just gonna reply I've got four, and I'm not gonna change my answer. So it's really good to see that he's embracing it and proud of it.
That's amazing. My daughter does the same. When she got asked in reception, she was like, "I'm fabulous. I have 2 mums. I'm amazing," and that was her response, and still is. So people are like, "Oh my God, you've got 2. Why haven't I got 2?" And then we're getting messages from other parents saying, "Apparently, we're not good enough. They want 2 mums now." So it's amazing when they're that confident, isn't it?
We get similar thing.
Thanks very much, Gaetan. Karen, where have you been able to find the best support?
Well, first, let me say that teenage boys would rather not have any moms. So, it's just, so, you know, what were we talking about? Where we've gotten support or where we want things that are different? I missed the question. It was a little hard to hear.
Where you're getting good support, but obviously where you want improvement. If you could fit that in 2 minutes, that'd be amazing.
Right. I mean, that's a 2-minute answer. Like in terms of support, I think there's like been 2 big areas for us. One is that we both have incredibly supportive and loving families. My kids, up until last year, had 4 grandparents who treat all their grandchildren the same, even though they are not biologically related to both of them. So we have incredibly loving families who have been really supportive of us. And by we were having children long after our parents had had to come to terms with us being gay. Our other big circle has been our synagogue community. We're part of the GLBT synagogue in New York. When we were having kids 20 years ago, we were part of a large group of friends who were all trying to get pregnant at the same time. We were in our, mid 30s to early 40s. We didn't have any role models. We didn't really, maybe there was one older, 1 kid before us or 2 kids before us. And in the couple of years that we were having kids in the early aughts, it was like a baby boom in New York. And and so all of a sudden everybody had kids, and we had this big circle, social circle, and that's been pretty incredible. We ended up with a lot of support around us when the boys were babies and toddlers. And I think it became a little harder to sustain as they got older, and our lives kind of had to shift to their orbit instead of being in what had previously been our own. And I was thinking a lot about what Jen was saying earlier, just about being in a gender neutral environment, and also really what everyone else has been saying. I think some of the things that have come up over the years, raising kids, like we chose to live in New York City. We chose to stay there rather than go somewhere else. In part because we knew we would have more choices on how to live as a gay family in New York City than we might in other places. Right. We get out of the country, but even within this country, that's certainly one piece of it. But we also, and I hope Jen doesn't have to do this as much as we've had to. Every single situation we take our kids into, whether it was a play group or schools or camps, we had to talk about. There's different kinds of families. There's all kinds of families. There's 2 mom families. There's 2 dads. There's a grandmother. There's 1 mom, whatever that may be. And to try to teach our kids and the people that they were going to come into contact with that there are all different kinds of families. And you shouldn't assume that they are all heterosexual, that they all have 1 son and 1 daughter, and a mom and a dad. And so that's been something that we've really tried to make sure that our kids felt like they were included in the world that they were entering into. And maybe it's easier in a place like New York City to do so. But even there, we would come up against places where that wasn't quite so obvious.
I guess it's difficult as well, isn't it? It's getting people to ask those open questions rather than making those assumptions. To actually ask the open questions, who's here today? Because that whole constant, especially as parents, it's like, we call it the second coming, where you have that coming out of the closet again at the surgery, at the supermarket, at the school, and having to have this is one mum, this is the other, this is our situation, which is great to educate people, but obviously for our children as well, it can get tiring, can't it?
But one of the places where it would show up a lot is in paperwork. You go to the doctor, you go to camp, you go to school, you go to after school programs, and there's slots that say mom and dad or mother and father, and we would always cross it out and write parent 1, parent 2. And most of what you see now is actually parent, and it doesn't say mom and dad anymore on much of what we see. So there's progress.
That's great. And just a quick one to finish off with you, Karen. What do you think could be done differently by the education system, governments in general, to foster better LGBTQ+ inclusivity?
being open, remembering that there's all different kinds of families and celebrating them all, and you know, little things like paperwork should be inclusive of your family. You shouldn't feel shut out from the moment you're handed a piece of paper to fill in your kid's name for preschool.
Right.
So I do think that there are little things that make you feel included, but I still think it's on parents to do a lot of work to make sure that their kids are not put in situations where they won't feel like they're included. And I think that, you know, that, so I'm not really sure what government, I mean, clearly, like Jen was saying, you still have to do a second parent adoption so that you can feel safe if you happen to get relocated to not New York.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there are things that can be done that way.
Legislations, more policies to protect us and our children, definitely. Completely agree with you. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Alistair, what would be your top tips for anyone going through the same journey as you?
I think so. The main thing for us was finding people to work with that we were comfortable with on our journey. And so in a surrogacy journey, and particularly in an international one, you know, there was the fertility clinic, there was a surrogacy agency, there were lawyers in the US. You know, it's just a cast of thousands by the end of it. So starting off with a you know, group of people that you're excited and to work with and that you're comfortable working with, I think that's the main thing. We chose our clinic in California based on the fact that we liked the doctor, and he seemed really friendly and was really helpful in kind of breaking the process down for us, you know. And I think that's probably the other big piece of advice that I would give as well is you know, surrogacy is really quite bewildering. There are so many things that you have to consider going through the entire process, but the important thing to remember is you don't have to tick it all off in one go. So we ended up initially creating our embryos, and at that point we were still looking for surrogates, and you know, by the end of our journey, I think our embryos probably had you know, sat in a lab in a freezer somewhere for probably 18 months before we were kind of at that point where we were ready to transfer. So yeah, there's a lot of information to take in. I think sort of getting up to speed on certain things. So I had an advantage because my degree was biology. My husband had to get up to speed on a lot of the biology terms and a lot of the stuff that we were talking to fertility clinics and stuff on. So that was a bit of a learning curve for him. But yeah, I think, you know, find people that you want to work with. Don't get too bogged down in all of the kind of the step-by-step of it, you know, because you can just take one step at a time and then take those decisions as you kind of go through the process. But do lots of research and talk to people as well. You know, we went to a lot of events that were run by sort of various organizations, some of them in the UK, but also international ones as well, where you just meet other intended parents, and you find out you know, a lot more, and we definitely, you know, we listened to Michael's podcast on our journey, and you know, I'm sure we picked up more than a few tips along the way there as well.
Perfect. And just what has your experience been through surrogacy with the healthcare system? Have you faced up bureaucracy? And can you also share best practice that's been placed for parental leave? I know you touched on it earlier with UK TV.
Yeah, I mean, generally things have been pretty good. I mean, all of the frontline staff at the NHS were brilliant, and were really, really helpful. I think that was partly because our surrogate, she had done a surrogacy journey before at the same hospital with all of the same midwives, so they already knew each other, and knew each other pretty well, and what to expect. I remember the day that Max was delivered, there was a lot of kind of back and forth in the hospital on the day around having some paperwork in place that would say that Toby and I were basically, you know, responsible for any medical consent for Max, so that Shelley and her husband would be able to kind of leave the hospital before us. And I think that the hospital, they knew they needed something, but nobody who was working on the ward that day really exactly knew what it was that they were asking for. So that was just a little thing to overcome. You know, our experience of the US healthcare system, it was great as well. You know, it's costly and it's admin heavy, but you know, there is definitely a kind of a customer service mentality to it, which we don't necessarily get over here in the UK. But you know, the number of times I've had people try to explain to me the insurance system that they have in the US, and I still don't understand
it. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we never really kind of got to the bottom of that, but somehow kind of managed to make it work. And then in terms of the surrogacy policy at UKTV, you know, that came about not because they had been sort of negligent or anything, but just nobody had asked. Nobody had. I mean, it's an organisation of only 200 staff. Nobody had till that point had come forward, you know, gay, straight or otherwise, to say that they were doing a surrogacy journey. So they just needed to turn that around, and they did it really, really quickly, but made it clear from the outset that it would put, you know, parents going through a surrogacy journey on the same level as parents through any other route.
That's brilliant here. Thank you so much for sharing, Alistair. And I have got one more question for Chloe, but I'm conscious that our star keynote speaker, Michael, hasn't actually been asked any, because obviously you were presenting. But I'd like to take the moment to ask you a question on, from your perspective of your journey and your expertise with my surrogacy journey, what would you give as advice or support or guidance to people looking to go down the same journey as you, the surrogacy path, from your perspective? Love to.
Thank you. As Alistair says as well, it can be a bit of a minefield, and when you start that journey, you only have to start Googling surrogacy to be scared to death about, you know, what could be involved, where it could go wrong. And you do have to be very careful. You know, you have to choose a pathway where there's zero exploitation, and that's of donors and of women and of people and of intended parents, because it happens across all spectrums. So, you know, you need to find your rhythm and find your either your organization, or if you want to go through that independently, then you know, fact finding is really important, and working with organizations that you trust, that have possibly been recommended to you, who you've referenced and you actually know their standing and their credibility. You know, surrogacy is a wonderful experience, and it's a route to parenthood which is, you know, growing rapidly, not just within our community, but, you know, globally. And what we always, you know, advise people on is that this is a decision not to be rushed, and it's certainly not one. You know, I spent 3 years researching it before we started, and I'm sure others have done that too. But I would absolutely you persevere with it. You know, it will stop and start. You know, surrogacy is not straightforward. And there will be bumps in the road, but just persevere with it, because if you've got your eye on that particular goal and that dream, then it will happen. You just have to, we have to work a little bit harder to make it happen. But, you know, again, some great organizations out there that can support people. There's a number of them, as well as my surrogacy journey. There's a whole of organizations that can support too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate that. And Chloe, with your amazing background, I'm loving it.
It's hiding a half-naked child.
That always happens.
Decided to take his clothes off, so I thought, parenting 101, let's hide the kid.
It's no problem. How can we support parents during the pandemic? Obviously, a lot of us have experienced parenting or going down the route to parenthood during the pandemic. So what's your view on how we can support parents through this journey?
You know, it's creating spaces like this where it's, you know, parents can come together and they can actually talk freely with each other, but also feedback to their businesses and what they really need. Like, it's the running joke how many parents, I think we can all raise hands, at some point have had to consider flexible working because either, you know, it's thinking about what do I do when I come back to work, or, you know, what does that look like? And the whole world has gone into a flexible working contract because of the pandemic. So it's now, how do we navigate through that? You know, someone said a little bit earlier, it's about thinking, how do I go back to work? Well, we've all been in our homes for a long period of time, trying to work, trying to manage ourselves, and then take care of the welfare of our children, and also help run a home on your own. And so it's for businesses to really think about the cost that has come to some people in real time. You know, there will be many people who are also experiencing what has also been happening alongside the pandemic. So when we think about, you know, our Black and brown LGBT siblings at this time who are also going through other things, and if they're parents as well, that's an added nuance. So I think communication and space is the most important thing. It's actually knowing that you're not alone, but it's also recognizing when we're talking about well-being, you need to make sure that you send to parents. When we're talking about what does it mean to be LGBT, that a space is also created for parents, and that communication comes hand in hand. So it always starts at the top, HR, D&I. If it's your ERG, make sure that if it's not there, that's okay, but those facets of the conversation come through, because for someone who's LGBT, the first place they might come to when they're thinking about their journey of parenting is actually to an ERG instead of any other route, because they're going to come and ask their own community first. So it's about thinking about how do you create those spaces. As you know, Karen and so many said, actually what has helped them through the journey have been those spaces of friendship that they've been able to, you know, buddy up together. I know all my parents' friends all had children in the same year. So we've all grown up. Actually, that's my first line of defense. I go and ask the old gang, you've been a parent first. Okay, what do I need to know? So, you know, it's how do businesses create that sense of community within and create a space to have those conversations.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm just going to head over to the Q&A. I know that, Michael, you've answered one of them in regards to organisations making surrogacy policies, which is great. There is another question from a gentleman who said, after taking a career break from a senior role, not without some thorough educating from my previous employer, I'm looking for tips and advice on how to address taking such a break, as I've found some underlying frowns when explaining my break. So, Alistair, that's probably one for you in regards to the fact that you took time off.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I guess there's probably a lot of women who are probably thinking, well, welcome to the club on that front. And actually, that might be my sort of suggested first port of call, because there will be a lot of women who have gone through exactly that thought process in the past. And, you know, I had it in the back of my mind as well, because, you know, our surrogacy journey took you know, 2 years before we knew we were pregnant and expecting. And all the way through during that, I was, you know, when there were opportunities that came up at work, or perhaps other kind of job opportunities coming up, I was sort of thinking, well, you know, actually, I might not be able to see this through. So should I say yes? Should I kind of do that? Should I accept this new project or whatever it is? So you've always kind of got those things in the back of your head. But, you know, ultimately as well, you need to be working somewhere where you're comfortable and you're happy to have those conversations. And I would say if you're working somewhere where, you know, your value isn't based around you and your work and what you're doing, and people are perhaps more concerned about if and when you might go off on leave, then, you know, maybe it's time to kind of rethink whether that's the place that you want to work and an organization that you want to contribute to ultimately. But yeah, it's a tricky one, but I would definitely seek advice of other people, because, you know, lots of people have you know, maybe not so much in the LGBTQ plus community, but certainly in the straight community, that's a well-trodden path, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alistair. So we've covered all the Q&As. People have been helping out in the chats. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, Alistair, Jen, Karen, Gaitan, Nikki and Chloe, for sharing their lived experiences and their advice and guidance. Michael for his great keynote speech. And You can all find my G Work on all of their social channels, their websites. Michael with 2 Dads and my Surrogacy Journey. And if you are looking for support from us, the LGBT Mummies Tribe, you can find us online as well. So thank you so much to everyone that has attended. We hope it's been informative and enjoyable for you, and we will sign off here. So thanks everyone. Have a great evening, and hope to see you soon.
Sorry, Laura, I'm going to just step in just for a little bit and thank you too for being such an amazing host. We're really appreciative of you, so thank you so much. Remember, today is WorkFair, so we also have a few more sessions coming up. So at 7 o'clock you can dial into our session on mentoring, and then at 8 we have a session focusing on mental health in the workplace. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up for either of those yet, there's still time. Just go onto the My G Work page underneath events, and like Laura says, you should be able to find every single panelist and engage with them on the platform. And this session will also be available on the platform to rewatch in I think about 24 to 48 hours, but I know that Christina and the team are under a lot of pressure, so do keep an eye on that. You can still watch it on Facebook. Have a lovely afternoon or evening, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.